Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. And as always, I hope that you enjoy.
Story number 1. A Call to Judgment, written by Scientific Theory. There are many in the assembly who would dismiss the accomplishments of humanity, who would point to their mistakes and failings as though these were truly the moments that define them. I cannot force you to see through their eyes, to, as they say, walk a mile in their shoes. I can only make an appeal to reason and hope that I might convince you to throw open our doors and welcome them truly into the universe. There has never been a more varied species to sail the stars, one so broken into factions and groups, one so randomly aligned at times. They have been both monstrous and merciful, hateful and humble, capable of committing atrocities so repugnant that some members have abdicated their seats here tonight, secure in the decision that they will never vote yes so long as they live. Yet, even at their most base, in the monuments of cruelty, there still burns an irrepressible empathy. The starving give their last piece of bread, the poor give their last dollar, the healthy give their lives. In the time that we should have been exploring their culture, we've instead been waylaid by talking heads, reactionaries to decry their history, arguing that it would only be a matter of time until they destroy us. Some even going so far as to suggest that we knock a piece of orbital debris into their gravity well. As though a universe willing to commit genocide at a moment's notice would still be a universe worth protecting. We've been distracted from what they truly offer by the sensationalism of their history, their greatest accomplishments overshadowed by their darkest moments. Moments that have been widely recognized and widely condemned. Moments that are taught to our children, so that they may never repeat the mistakes of their forefathers. A bravery that we ourselves are unable to match. We sit up in a fortress in the sky, staring down at a frantic people desperate to survive, with technology that is beyond their reach, and we make as though to judge them. Our sociologists argue that their behavior is because they disregard the value of life, that they would only voluntarily end their own because they have no respect for it. They forget that we ever lived in a time where to live was to struggle, and act as though these humans would have peace if they only just sat down one day and decided to. As though there are no other issues that drive them to the edges that they walk. There is a writer of theirs by the name of David Foster Wallace, who I think perfectly captured a true image of humanity. Not only for themselves, but for us as well. We look down on them from above, and we see them throw themselves head first into every problem that comes their way. We watch as they take incredible risks to solve issues that are nothing to us. We watch them fight and die and destroy one another, seemingly without end. The risks they take as they desperately claw their way forward are as alien to us as the technology we use to travel the stars would be to them. There is a fire behind humanity that is consuming everything that they know and care for. They are not any less terrified of the risks that they take. Their reckless attempts to master technology that should be decades beyond their reach. When they take a life, it does not impact them any less than it would us. From where we stand, gazing on them in judgment, We cannot understand the all-consuming force that drives them, that pushes them to do anything in order to protect and save some small part of the world around them, to make sure something remains for their children, for their friends, that they lash out in the wrong directions, that they make mistakes, is not a failing of their species. It is simply a failure of their knowledge. They have faced down horrors we have never known and conquered a world so harsh as to have nearly winnowed them to extinction. We stand watching as they hurl themselves from the window of burning buildings and only wonder at how the terror of the fall does not faze them. It does. In each one resides a deep and crushing terror that they will be the ones to fail, that their leap will not bring safety, and that those who rely on them will perish. We stand here with the means to extinguish the blaze that sears them, that forces them to take the plunge after plunge, to buy just a little more time, and ask ourselves if it would not be better to fan that flame into an inferno. Perhaps they are not the ones who require judgment. End of story. Story number 2. The Smart Choice, written by Radius 55. The fleet appeared out of hyper 8 light minutes away from the local inhabited world and promptly began accelerating. It was composed of 64 warships, each armored and shielded to withstand the absolute hell that was modern weapons systems. But no combat craft worth its salt could take a beating without being able to dish it out as well, and this fleet was no exception. The ships bristled with particle beams, coherent light projectors, plasma cannons, kinetic kill systems, and missile tubes. It was a force to be reckoned with, and it was bearing down on the human colony world at about 1% of the speed of light. With the sensors, the fleet could detect the panic their arrival had caused. Some of the merchant shipping common in the heavily trafficked trade route was fleeing. Other ships were staying in position, knowing their civilian-grade drives couldn't get them to the hyperlimit before they were caught. Of the two, the Admiral knew the latter group was likely smarter. These forces often executed crews of shipping that tried to run. Those that surrendered promptly merely had their cargo confiscated. And there were at least 20 stronger drive emissions lighting up. That would be the human picket force, drastically outgunned by the incoming fleet. They were taking the better part of valor and escaping on the reciprocal heading. Their powerful drives would be able to keep them out of alien fire. This development disappointed the fleet admiral, but not overmuch. After all, the primary target was securing the lucrative trade world, not engaging the human fleet. And it appeared that they would capture at least 120 merchant hulls in the process. The Overmasters would be pleased. Entering orbit near the planet's primary transshipment station, the fleet broadcasted their demands for surrender. A few automated laser platforms opened up in response and were smashed with contemptuous ease. For good measure, they began jamming any communication band that showed activity, save the few reserved for fleet broadcasts. It was that moment an officer on sensor watch signaled the Admiral's attention. It seemed that the human fleet had reversed course. They had found their courage, after all, and their complete destruction would only boost the Admiral's prestige. He ordered the fleet to change course to meet the humans well away from any traps they may have laid near orbit. Threat warnings blared on the flagship's bridge an instant before the first beam struck. More followed in rapid succession, and the Admiral could now see the traces of the flock of missiles fired from the freighters? He knew it shouldn't be possible. He knew it as he ordered return fire, and the beams meant to melt through meters of battle steel at ranges of several light seconds, tore through the unarmored hulls of the freighters like paper. But the damage had been done. The beams had been roughly installed throughout the merchant ships in the 12 hours since the enemy had been sighted, knocked out of shields throughout the fleet. The missiles, hard on the heels of the energy weapons, didn't know nor care that their launch platforms had been turned to scrap. They had their targets and had been fired from well inside the standard point defense envelope. Ships had only a few seconds to fire last-ditch volleys of countermeasures before the sledgehammer hit home. The Admiral was stunned by the carnage that had unfolded in front of his very eyes. Moments before, his fleet numbered 64 combat-ready warships. Now, it was a mere 30, all of which were damaged, some to the point that they were little better than floating hulks. The merchant fleet, on the other hand, was gone. Sensors only spotted a pair of escape pods, one quite obviously venting atmosphere. But the human fleet, bearing down on the now damaged and depleted fleet, he had to decide on a course of action. There was still a chance of fighting through the craft. The humans were outnumbered and still marginally outgunned, even with the battle damage. Then he considered what had happened. The attack had not been planned far in advance. That much was certain. The beams were from a variety of models. An examination of the sensor records showed a crude mounting of the systems. Jamming should have made any effective remote targeting impossible, and the time-critical nature of the modifications spoke against automated and non-local control. Anyway, then he thought of a pair of escape pods, then examined a portion of the sensor's feed more carefully. Finding what he was looking for, it only took a few seconds to reach decision. The Admiral straightened and told his officers to cut all power to offensive systems and transmit their surrender. If the traders of the species were willing to co-sign themselves to certain deaths rather than simply turning over their ships, he could see no profit in going up against those whose duty it was to fight and die for their people. End of story. The algorithm reckons you should be watching this video next, and I recommend that you should be always watching my video. So, click with energy! And yes, clicking that does help the channel. Thank you very much. I just want to give a quick thanks to the Tier 5 patrons and channel members. Alithia, Barky, Fudic Yol, Cam Maxwell, Caspar Onholtz, White Band 420, Lord Asrakal, Arcalian, and Oakfield.